So yeah, I'm Ped. We've got Jess and Alicia here, lighting and compositing. We're just going to take you a little bit about Vine. What we're going to be talking about is the Rig Season 2. It was a massive project for us, like a really next level type of game for us. So it was an interesting one to talk about, and hopefully you can maybe understand the sort of challenges we faced and what we managed to do really well. A bit about Vine is we're quite a small team. During the rig, we peaked in terms of artists at about 40 artists. It was about a 50-50 split. We had 20 or so in CG or 20 or so in comp. And for us, that was big. Like, we don't usually get that big. And obviously other companies on this roster will be maybe laughing at such a small team. But for us, it's really important to stay nimble and small. We sort of operate similar to sort of advertising teams in other companies where you have quite concentrated talent, quite generalist, broad skill sets and things. So that's how we like to operate as well, but in the television side rather than in commercials. We're also hybrid, fully remote type company. I'm hybrid myself. There's a few people that come into the office every day, and some people who haven't even been in the country before, and they still work with us seamlessly. We also do all stages of the VFX in-house. Sometimes we outsource things like roto or prep, bit of camera tracking, but we do have teams in-house that can do it as well. So we try to keep everything in-house, everything nimble, communication is strong. And we've had some nice success recently, I'd say, and with some nominations and awards. This is a highlight reel that we've got playing in the background as well, all the work we've done in the past few years. A lot of which I think we can be really, really proud of. There's some really high level work in there that competes with the bigger names. And I think for the highlight for me is the BAFTA nomination that we got. Even though we didn't win, it was still nice to be alongside the likes of NPC, Framestore. You know, we're punching well above our weight. And I think that's a really nice accolade to have. So yeah, we do big work for such a small team. And I think that's a really fun team to be a part of. So moving on to the rig itself, we have a little reel prepared as well, so you can see the work we did. I think that should be playing in a moment. Please enjoy. Cool, thank you for that. So to go into the process of that, you can see there's a lot of work in there. Hopefully it sort of in a way doesn't look like a lot of work, because it should all work cohesively and feel like one nice uniform environment. So to go right to the very beginning, we worked closely with the client. they provided us with some early images of what they had ideas of what it should look like, but where it comes from in terms of how the structures are built, kind of color palette, how it looks underwater, how light works underwater. We went through a lot of talking and finding reference images and everything to see what they wanted. You can see in the top left corner, there's some images that I think they gave to us. Looks like they were made from Midjourney or something, or another AI generated image, which is broadly nonsense, but it gives you a nice idea of color palette and maybe some nice shapes in there too. And also just an idea of what it looks like underwater. It's quite difficult to convey that because when you are that deep underwater, and we're talking 200 or 300 meters underwater, light doesn't penetrate very far. And if it was completely dark, it'd be a bit pointless. So you have to sort of break the laws of physics a bit and still maintain the fact that it looks like deep, vast expanse of water, but not too clear that it looks like you're just in open air either. So there was a balance to strike there. They also provide images of things that they didn't like. For example, in the bottom right-hand corner, there's the tree roots and things. They didn't want it to feel too much like a wooden solid structure. It's a mycelium. It's like a fungus type of structure. So if you look at the bottom left image, that's a bit more like what they want, quite fibrous. You get nodes where lots of roots come out in all different angles, rather than all connecting to one source, which you get on the actual tree type roots. So there's things to avoid and things to aim for as well. And then in the middle at the bottom, you have a big cliff, which is what we're basing our story on. Obviously, the diver stands on the edge of the cliff and looks out into the open where the trees, the mycelium trees, are growing. Once we had that sort of in mind, or in tandem, we started doing the post-viz. Everything they had already been shot, so we didn't have any sort of on-set supervision from us. Obviously, there was a supervisor on the shoot, but we weren't involved at that stage. We were involved later on, so we did some post-viz. They had a good idea of what they wanted, but we needed to really block it out. It's such a big environment to deal with that we needed to figure out where things are going, how it's going to look when we get the cameras in the right places, because they're filming in basically a warehouse. They can't pull the camera out hundreds of meters away from the talent. So we had to get the plates, shrink them down, sometimes to only 10% of what they were, and build the CG around that. So there was a lot of redoing of the cameras. And so we did most of the shots again, basically in there. Not all the shots were done in post-viz, so there were some new ones. They adjust the edit around it and everything like that. So it was a really, really critical stage that we had to deal with there. And in tandem with that, we did the concept as well. So we had Scott McKinn's with us. He's a very accomplished concept artist. I suggest you look up his name. He's done some really, really impressive work over the years for different movies and television and things like that. So it was great to have him on the team with his expertise and figure out how this was going to look along with the client. We were working quite closely with them to figure out what one tree looks like and what a forest of trees looks like. And then we move into the final sort of 3D viz, I'll call it normal viz, not post viz, and how we actually built the structures. So I'm going to pass over to Jess, who worked on the 3D team.
Hello. So we're quite a small studio, so we kind of got roped into like getting our hands dirty with like different areas. So we'll talk a bit about lighting, but also just about the development of the assets. So our main asset was the hero tree, and one of the things that the clients wanted is they didn't want it to be like a classic tree with a thick trunk and lots of branches. They wanted it to be quite root-like, and this ties into the whole fact that the forest is connected. It's like a network, and it's all, anything that happens to one tree is felt by other trees. So they were very much built by like root-like structures. So you can see in the top left, you've kind of got those variations in shape. We were trying to decide how thick and thin it is, whether we wanted it to be quite solid or for bits to come out, and which I think out of those images, probably like first, third and fourth one are quite similar to what we ended up with. And there also was a decision made that there would be a core structure that ran up the tree, and that would be quite a big source of light in the forest. And we weren't quite sure about how this is going to look. Was this going to be individual roots, individual sections, the entire tree? So we had some experimentation of what kind of shapes we wanted. And eventually we decided that it would be a kind of thin inner structure that wouldn't really affect exterior roots, but it would cast light and a sense of glowing within. So a sense of life, I guess, inside the tree. So the last image with the different colour variations, that's what we ended up going with. We also pushed away from blue and green because the client wanted a bit more colour variation to make it really stand out from the rest of the scene. On the left, right hand side of the slide, we've got two images, and that was pretty much our final tree. You can see there's some annotations on the bottom image where client have decided how they want the tree to connect to the canopy. And yeah, I'll show you a shot. So this one here. So this shot is a breakdown of one of our shots that featured only the hero tree. The hero tree was the first tree to be revealed out of the forest. And yeah, it looks really cool. You can see all the glowers in the canopy. That was something that we brought in to give a sense of life. And the way we would reveal the trees often was this transition of light flowing upwards. And the core would be the main source of that, which would eventually hit the canopy and affect the glowers that were up inside the canopy. Here we go. So the forest. So we had quite a few shots that focused just on the hero tree. Eventually, our big reveal was to reveal this huge forest. Another reason why we kept the branches quite high up is that we wanted the ability to see through the forest and see right to the back, just to give a sense of scale. So Christian, he was our artist for the hero trees. He had a big setup where he had different tree variations. He looked into different shapes, different silhouettes. We looked at saplings, like younger trees that were growing. Also in the bottom left, there's a image of it's the core, but also there's these glowers that run up the tree, and they were basically point simulations. It kind of gave a sense of movement of life, which started from the bottom and then would flow to the top. And so each tree had its own sim that was cashed out for these glowers. And you can see the two middle stills at the bottom. You've got a very faint flicker on the left of the glowers in the canopy starting to form, and then on the right, the entire forest is lit up. And also alongside with these variations in trees, we had variations in cores as well, just to follow the shape and the silhouette of the trees. Okay, and then this is our hero shot. So you can see there's quite a lot going on, and it was a heavy shot. And we've got two shots on the right from different angles, but just to have a quick explanation of how we set up this shot. The look of these shots was constantly changing throughout the entire show. So we ended up supplying comp with everything we could possibly give them to have the right tools to achieve what the clients wanted. This included with changing the forest and taking out most of the cores. So you can see that we've lost a lot of the cores, and only the hero tree is staying lit up. And the glowers ended up becoming a main source of light for God rays, which, whilst we understand underwater, it's unlikely you were going to get this level of light. This was a very beautiful forest, and the clients really wanted it to be something that would be appreciated and would kind of provoke some emotion. So yeah, that's why we've got so much light passing through from the glowers. But yeah, overall, I think we had about 60 trees, maybe even more. They were all scattered, the different variations across points, and yeah, that made our forest. And to try and keep things as low as possible in terms of the file size, we obviously would cull anything beyond the view of the camera. Okay, and then we've got our cliff. So top right is all we had from the client. It's just the set piece that she stands on, and everything else we had to replace in CG. So we had to consider the top of the cliff where a lot of the shots would happen, and also the side of the cliff for a lot of the wides. We've got some experimentation there of different shapes of the cliff. So you can see you've got some on there with like some quite sharp ledges. Client didn't really like that. They wanted something that would reflect images they'd found in real life above water, not below. And then the bottom two images were lookdev images, and then there's some lighting images on the right of the top of the cliff. So we ended up going for quite straight down, still slightly sloping, but flat cliff. And there was also the intention that this cliff would be covered in roots, which we'll get to. So yeah, we've just got a couple of stills here. You can see in this one, this is where the roots are being added in. And then at the top here, we've got our seafloor with root rocks basically scattered along the entire edge of this cliff. Okay, so roots. So we had a lot of roots because the idea is that our diver, the main character, Rose would touch the roots and it would awaken the forest. So we needed a connection point from the cliff to the forest, and that's what these roots were for. The way, as Ped mentioned, mycelium was brought into the idea of their structure. So that's like a network of thread-like fungal filaments. It kind of is similar to roots, and it's very intricate and very detailed. So you can see there's some experimentations here from Cella of how we wanted our roots to look. It's quite web-like. We didn't want it to have no sense of direction, so like the bottom middle image was a bit too much, but on the left we've got this sense of flow of where it's heading to. And yeah, it worked out really well because we had some really pretty shots, and these are them. So we're just going to play these two, but we'll play one of them full screen in a minute. You can see as she touches the roots, it kind of begins, it's like an energy transfer. It like awakens the forest, and we show that through the moving of light. And the way that the light moves is very organic, it's not too solid. There's some areas that are dead and areas that are broken up. It's very vein-like, but yeah, they're really pretty shots. And then just to show you full screen, just to make it clearer, this is our first shot.
A lot of work went in.
Yeah, a lot of work, a lot of work.
It's really difficult to get that sense of energy passing through the centers of those tubes, if you call them tubes, rather than just the exterior. We want it to feel like it's an internal light as well. So it was a lot of back and forth and figuring things out and different techniques to try and get that sense of this nice natural organic energy flowing.
And you can also see when it hits certain points, it kind of hits the mycelium because it spreads out. Like it's not like a straight curve, it kind of spreads out as it hits those tiny threads. So yeah, really, really pretty. And then we've got our particles. So we had one shot with a dead root being crumpled. It's pretty simple. It was nothing too heavy. It was like it breaks up into dust. It's been there for a long time. These are ancient trees. So we had one simi made of that. And we also had our debris. So our debris is just basically underwater matter that gives this sense of that we are underwater because we don't get this above water. And it would be dead bits of plant, dead bits of fish, I don't know, you name it. And it was in every single shot. So whilst we had these forests to do, we also had to take into account that every single shot, even if there wasn't a huge amount of CG in it, would need simulations of the debris and then to be added in. And these went quite far back. Most of the shots had at least 3 layers, and then it would be cold by the camera to make sure we weren't overdoing it. But it eventually got quite heavy. So yeah, it's really faint and very subtle and probably not something you'd look at and notice straight away. But yeah, it took up a lot of time. And then we've got our assets, so our rover and diver. So you've got the set stuff on the left, so the photos we got from the client. It's not that like detailed, and we knew that we weren't going to see them very close up. Anything that we replaced in plate was going to often be quite wide shots and quite far away, so we just matched what they had set up. And we set up a lighting rig as well for the rover so that it would have lights that kind of well, I guess it would have had underwater that would show up when it was on the cliff. And then the diver had a couple of lights around the helmet. Okay, and yeah, render stats and summary.
Yeah, there was a lot a lot of data to deal with on this. So each tree was 2.5 million curves, and each curve was built up of points, obviously. So in total, it was about 200 million curves for the points for the no, 200 million curves for the forest and 3 billion points for the forest in total, which is a lot to deal with. We were rendering this in Arnold and didn't really complain, so that's great. That's what it's good at. And we also used mesh lights for inside the cores. So those lights inside the trees themselves, we wanted to use, well, maybe Jess, you can talk about that.
Yeah, we used like a curve-like structure that just some curves that followed the shape of the tree. We did try like point lights, but there would be too many point lights at that point. We did try a bit of emission, but we found that the best way would be that we just have something that follows the silhouette of the tree.
Yeah.
So we maybe about 3-4 curves, I reckon.
Yeah, and that's what gave the best result. It's not the fastest result. I don't know who's rendered with mesh lights before. They're not the quickest because they're so noisy, but they gave by far the best result, the most natural looking result. So we went with it and we just dealt with the render times, and some of them were quite long. We had some frames which took well over 14 hours probably per frame, and there's so many layers to render as well. So we tried to break it down into areas that are easier to deal with, but also the render farm to deal with. So yeah, there's a lot of data going on here.
Yeah, and then our rest of the lights in the scene were just area lights to try and hit the sides of the tree. We didn't want anything front on, but we wanted to everything was about playing with the silhouettes. We had a HDRI that we had made up just to give the general feel of the colours that we wanted. It was just dark blue and a couple of point lights in the canopy. Some of them were disregarded because we had a dead zone in the hero tree. You can see it in the bottom still. There's like that darker area. That was where the hero tree had been injured. And at one point, clients wanted us to try and light it up with red. But in the end, that all ended up getting taken out. And we just left it as a darker shape because, it just worked to make more sense. And then as I've mentioned before, the glowers were emissive particle sims. And yeah, some of the heavier shots had some solid render times. I think we estimate about 14 hours. And we also were tackling quite a lot of noise as well in this, especially with like mesh lights. With these shots, noise was a bit of a fight. Okay, and then I'm going to pass to Alicia for 2D.
Hello. Thank you very much. So let's get started. So I was one of the 2D leads. We actually had two because the project was so big. And one of my main responsibilities were single tree shots, special look development, and making sure it's all consistent. And while CG was busy gardening and growing trees out, we started with a plate prep. One thing you can see in the top image on set that actually had roots glowing. It had small lights popping in and out, but in the end was decided it doesn't exactly look as good. The prep department had to paint all the lights out. And early on, it also was decided that we are keeping the rock from the set because the actress interacted with it so much. It would take too long to try and put full CG rock. So whole CG was mainly built around it. One thing CG did do early on for us was provide object tracks for her helmet. It's a fairly common practice not to have a real glass when filming helmets because of crew reflections. So they quickly provided this, so that kept 2D department busy just adding some dust, making sure the helmets look dirty and like it's actually interacting with its own environment. You can also see that originally the actress had a light coming from her hand when she was meant to interact with the trees. And eventually, again, the client decided they actually don't like what it looks like, so more paint for us, kept us busy. Then because CG department was so busy, there were certain bits we decided to do in DMP. The route she was meant to interact was meant to look old, and what they built on set just wasn't selling it. So our talented DMP artist has created a couple stills that we were able to use. Also, the idea was that the tree is still alive and has a small hard bit, which is a blue light. And there were specific timings that were after. They wanted it to be exactly like a hard bit. So we spent some time developing a bit of expressions and just trying to sell that the tree is pulsating. Another thing we did on the same shot, we had to create some undulations effects, which is a distortion. So idea was it starts beneath her hand and eventually starts to interact with the whole hand. And CG department provided us a lot of passes that they're keen to talk about.
Yeah, yeah. So you can see here we've shown you what it looked like sort of behind the scenes almost. When you're rendering a distortion of a plate, you can't really render that as such unless you're trying to maybe use refraction or something, and that didn't quite provide the right look. So we went into Embergen for this. I don't know if you've used Embergen in Movie, but it's a great tool for making simulations, especially quite quickly. I think it's targeted at the games crew more than the VFX teams, but it's you know, it's the right tool for the job here. We got our artists to create these smoky effects to come out, and you can see they're just like RGB values. They're not actually sort of rendered and lit elements. And then we pass those RGB values into comp, and they can distort that in Nuke.
Yeah, so we use different values and apply different levels of distortions depending on how effect was developing. Some aberrations just to make it more interesting. Then we had multiple feedbacks from client and just small fine tuning. But once the setup was set, it was just passed over and copied over, and it was fairly easy after that.
I think we've got an example of a final shot after this one. Yeah, so you can see how it's quite subtle. There, just about maybe when you see it in 4K on TV.
Also, because there are all these FMJ's particles floating around, it was meant to interact. So CG department also ensures that all the particles just bounce away and all feels and looks organic. So look development. There was a lot of look developments that CG has done on their end, but there was a lot that was happening on the 2D side, and some things were easier to fix in 2D than it was to fix in 3D just because of how long it took to render. And here you can see how comp progressed. So in bottom right is version 9, which is fairly close to what LightSlab was initially looking like. It has a more prominent area at the top, which is meant to be like a dead area of the tree. But eventually client decided they wanted to look more greens, they wanted to blend more, slightly different colors, which you can see on the bottom left. Then on top right is when client decided they wanted brighter, because the tree is meant to be so bright, you're meant to see it from the outside in a sequence. They're meant to be like also water lighting up. So we built this. And then later the decision was, instead of having gorge rays very prominent, they wanted to blend to make it look more like a water environment. And again, it was easier to do it in comp. So if you pay close attention to free screen grabs, it's exactly the same gorge rays that just went for a modification inside comp to try and achieve the effect line was after. And on side right, you can see the script that it took to build this whole shot together. So it was a fairly big script with a lot of things happening in it. So notes. So on top left is a pure slab comp, and then on top right is what the tree comp looked like. One beauty of the way we built our scripts, there were 3 sections to it. One was just tree by itself. Another one was creating a gorge rays interaction, and the third section was creating FNJ. So in a way, it was easy to split one shot between multiple artists if it was required, and we could just focus on their part. One thing client wanted is more detail in the trees, and that's when CG artists provided us with a nodule pass, which is a blue tree you can see in a smaller section. However, while we were going for it, client decided he wanted even more detail. So we ended up using a plugin of advanced P noise, which just created a lot of details in a canopy, but we decided to be more creative with it. So we used P pass, the position pass, to restrict it just to bottom branches. And this way we just built different layers of detail to make it more fun and interesting looking. 2D gorge rays. So while majority of it was done in 3D, initially we were testing gorge rays in 2D purely for speed purposes because rendering was taking too long. So while look developing, we sort of set up the look that we eventually got signed off, and then it was taken to 3D to do it properly. However, for some shots, we still kept it in 2D, which is the shot where the tree is revealed for the first time. There was a particular look client wanted, and there was a lot of back and forward. So in the end, you can see script on the left is I just took several different noise passes and created the race myself, and then using position pass broke it up so it looks like it's the light is interacting with the tree. And this way I had an actual control of how much light is coming from, where it's coming from, and eventually we were able to find it to the point where client was happy. And also at the bottom you can see a demonstration between light slab and final comp. So that's how much work went into it by compositing department. And here you can see the beautiful 3D portraits that team provided for us, and they would provide us 3 different layers. So as a result, we could combine different combinations and achieve the look. So it mainly was just matte black and white. So all the color was generated in the comp side. We mixed some constants, some grade nodes, just trying to get the color palette client was happy with. And at the bottom, you can see the script on the right of how involved it actually became to create the look. So it wasn't just plug in, done. So bottom left is the final shot. In the middle is what it would look like if we didn't modify the alpha channels of the gauge rays. So they would be more prominent, more shiny in the middle. So as a result, we had to get more involved. Also because the camera angles were changing, in a way it was hard for 3D department to keep lights so kind of consistent, because the client had specific looks they wanted, and even for realistically it wouldn't look the same. They wanted it to look the same. So this is where it became easy for 2D department to manipulate it, just kind of compare what the hero shot looked like and then try and match it the same way by rotor shapes. And again, my favorite pass, position pass, just so much power over it. And moving on.
So yeah, we're just both going to chat about client like chats that we had. We basically, this one's about the cameras, because the cameras changed constantly. We started off with locked off cameras that we got from layout, but then once we started seeing the actual renders, the clients wanted to change camera angles and pull back. This meant, unfortunately, that throughout the show, cameras would change a little later than we would have liked, and actually meant that we ended up rendering with quite a bit of overscan. Like some shots had 100% overscan just to allow comp the control of, you know, setting the shot up to how the clients wanted. We did try and compensate with like render resolution on the really big overscan shots, but yeah, it was tricky. And we had a lot of interactive sessions like this where we, you know, we've got a plate here where we're seeing Rose's face, but we're going to have the reflection on her visor, and we were trying to line up the tree in a client session to try and decide what she's looking at and at what angle. And yeah, it was a very interactive session. And then God rays. So God rays became a huge thing. Very, very precise on where we wanted God rays to hit, and where the clients knew where they wanted it to hit as well. So often it was part of the storytelling. So you can see in the bottom 2 images, it is hitting the set, the area where the diver would have been stood. So I guess it was trying to connect the two to make it really obvious who's looking at where, and link the 2 up, because the character and the tree in a weird way were connected. And you can see the top image there's like an angle of how they want the tree to shine, and it did change every single shot. It was not consistent throughout. It was very much on a per shot basis.
Yeah, and as you can see, the specific look they wanted, so that's where comp became more involved, because we can control it more with like rotor shapes, put more grade just to amplify specific portraits ever after. So it became a tag sort of teamwork to decide which section the CG can fix on their end and which section we can do quicker on our end. One thing that did happen, client actually came to the office. They chose several shots they really wanted to set a look with together, because it's easier when you can do it together and see what is happening inside the script. So a lot of shots were actually done remotely with our supervisor. But when it came to the single tree shot, it was done together with me because I work in the office. So me and he were sitting and going through my script layer by layer, explaining what we're doing, why we're doing it. And then he would add modifications as we progressed to what he wanted to see. And one of the things was getting the detail in the trees that I was discussing earlier. So he had specific look he was after. He wanted certain bits lighter, certain bits darker, more color variations. So it was a fairly involved process, but it also was very helpful process because I was able to understand clearer what the client was after. And it was a similar thing with the gorge race. We started to create the look together with him. One problem was because the script was so big, we ended up fixing things in the wrong section and slightly broken. So I was like, I know what you want. If you give me 20 minutes, I will fix it and I'll make it look the way you desire. And thankfully I got it right. He was happy, he signed it off, and that was the look, and we just passed it over to the rest of the sequence. Also, talking about easy screen sharing, at the top is a perfect example. Me and one more compositor, Miro, because of tight deadlines, we ended up having to share one of the scripts. Since I've developed the look for the trees, I was responsible for building the trees in a tree comp. And then once he took into his, he made it interact with the gorge race. So this is also a good example of how one element can change just depending on how you apply the effects to it. And yeah, at the bottom is just a small demonstration of how the details were progressing on the tree. So it's like pure tree, no details, some with nodules, and then with some undulations, just getting the glows working right.
Okay, so I think we're very close to question time, so I'll just run through this really quickly. But we built USD at the same time of running this show, so it was very hectic, but really informative, and we learned a lot. So we were pushing Houdini for this show. It felt like the best way to be tackling such a show of this size. We had our lovely artist Mehdi. He built a custom USD and Solaris pipeline. We ended up rendering with Arnold, mainly because it was just one thing that was familiar to us. We'd already been rendering with Arnold, and we felt like it would be, rather than having to relearn everything, it'd be one thing that we can, roll back on and be like, okay, I've tackled that before. So we did stick with Arnold, and we did test out a few other options though, before making that decision. We were a smaller company, as Ped mentioned, and this was a big show, so it felt like the right time to have a bit more of a solid pipeline in place. It allowed us better structure and organisation, kept the bigger scenes lighter. They were still a little heavy, but it definitely made them more manageable. And as I mentioned, it was a great opportunity to learn. So just a few of the tools we had created. We had a shot manager, which was to create and manage a shot's content per department. And it was in OneNote as well, which was fantastic. And it allowed artists to edit versions. We had our cache loader and exporter, which was the publishing of a shot or sequence cache across all departments. And it made exporting easier whilst keeping track of the original scene. And then the asset loader and exporter, which is pretty similar, but mainly targeted for assets. Our Vine Arnold Solaris node, which was our render setup node, so we could set up our AOV, samples, over, scan, anything we needed for each shot. And Vine Render, which is our node that submitted renders to the farm. We use Deadline here at Vine, and that's what we had linked up. And then our shot switcher, which we didn't get to use, but the idea was that it would generate similar shots and allow us to work on similar shots at the same time. So I've just got a quick video here. It's only like 2 minutes long, so hopefully it'll be okay time-wise. But it will just show you. So we've got this camera here that's being cached out. You've got the option to static cache or animated cache. You can see the paths at the bottom there. They made it really easy to find the scene where this cache was coming from. So if there was anything we needed to change at the source scene, we knew where to go. We've got a asset loader here, so we're loading in the model of the tree. We've assigned some shaders to it, and then we're just publishing out lookdev. You can see there's a comment section for any notes that we wanted to add. There's a version drop down if we wanted to roll back versions or just switch it to latest. You've got all the tasks and all the asset names and the option to create something that's new. So if you want to set up your own new asset. We've got the tree arms there. A lot of those were animated caches because they were moving throughout the shots. Even though the trees were static, they did move and interact. And then you can see here, this was how we were working before the shot manager was ready. It's like a stacked workflow of us loading it in. If you set a node to not be latest, it would show up as orange. So it was really clear if something wasn't set to the latest version. And yeah, you can see our Vine Solaris node here, which is all AOVs, which were all ready to go, just through checkboxes and our samples. So this is the shot manager node that I spoke about. It is basically those stacked green nodes just all combined into one node. So it meant we could load everything in one node, but it wasn't ready until the end of the show. So only a few shots actually got to use it. And we also developed a pass manager that Medi created. So we've got a prune on the left here and we're just taking out the arms, but this pass manager would set up the foreground, the background, the volume, and then it would allow us to hide or, you know, matte anything. And also there was an option for overriding samples at the bottom. And then our shot switcher, which we never got to use, but would be amazing for shots that are really similar. You literally just check the shots and then generate the inputs, and there you go, you've got something ready to go, and it would load in the shot managers for each of those shots. Okay, I think it's, oh yeah, reflecting on you were saying, almost question time. So yeah, what we loved, it was easy to share assets and caches. It was efficient. Shot manager made big setups smaller, so sometimes when you open up scenes, it didn't look so intimidating. And we could work and build shots faster, and it was actually quite easy for for our new artists to understand the shots, because a lot of the shots were built in a similar way, and it was quite nice and well built in the way that we could look at it and be like, okay, so that's there, and it's all laid out neatly. Our struggles running a new show alongside building a pipeline, so we got delayed by things not being not being ready or not working, or so it did push like our artists quite a lot, because we're having to not only explore the show and develop it, but also learn and get something working at the exact same time. We had some implementation issues of Arnold, Husk and deadline issues, and just getting those to work together. Medi dealt with all these issues on his own as well, so hats off to him. He was really, really good. Rules on naming. So when you start working really fast to meet deadlines, you start making mistakes. And things like debris. If we're publishing a debris cache and one's capital D and one's lower D, then the artist who picks it up is not going to know which one am I supposed to be going for. So it made us realise, we need to bring in some stricter rules and stuff like that. Yeah, complex and changing shots was still difficult to manage because we were doing so much shot specific stuff. We ended up having to dive in and override things and make changes. So even though we were like using caches that were locked off, we ended up pulling it apart anyway, but that was more for like the big forest shots and such. And lighting remained still shot specific and it wasn't publishable, so lighting pretty much stayed as it was.